Hey everybody, welcome to On the Homefront. I'm John Murphy. Very happy you're with us here in the studio, sharing some time. We're here live every Wednesday at 5 o'clock here on WILI, AM 1400, and 95.3 on the old FM. Also, we're on Friday mornings on WICH, covering Norwich and New London. And we're also on WECS in Willimantic, covering the Eastern Connecticut region. Our program this week is going to open with the Willimantic Orchestra. They've been here for 40 years making music. It's an open orchestra that people can join, share the beauty of music, and then sharing it with the audience. We'll talk with Sandy in a few moments. And then we're going to continue our series looking at the work of Owsley Stanley, one of the great music engineers. So many of his great recordings became incredible hits with musicians from all over the 70s and 80s. And we've had conversations before. They have a new release now looking at John Hammond, a 1973 concert in San Francisco. The archives has over 1,300 hours of original recordings they're trying to digitize to save this audio history while it's still available. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. So first of all, Sandy Rosado, nice to have you here in the studio.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Sandy was one of the early members of the Willimantic Orchestra, and she's here today to talk about a concert they have coming up, as well as the fact that being an open orchestra for the community, people can join and add to the music. So either way, it's going to be a great conversation. So Sandy, let's get down to a few nuts and bolts about the concert coming up on December 15th, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I have the poster here. We are featuring a vocalist on this concert. Sometimes we have special guests come in and play solos or sing. We have Caroline O'Dwyer will be our vocalist. She's doing some Mozart arias with us.
Okay.
We're also going to be playing most of Sibelius's Symphony No. 2.
Right.
And Amy Beach's Ball Mask. And a little bit of Leroy Anderson's Sleigh Ride, just for the Christmas season.
Just a little sidebar. Since you have a few performances a year, how do you decide, with all the material you have to travel, how to put things together for a show?
Well, we do have what we call a program committee. So we have a group of volunteers from the orchestra who get together and they take suggestions from members, and the conductor is highly involved as well. And they also look at the forces we have in our orchestra, because we're a fairly small orchestra. So some things, in fact, the Sibelius, one of the reasons we're making a few cuts in that is because of some of the forces. We don't have quite the full orchestra that Sibelius might have expected. So sometimes we modify things a little bit, or we pick pieces that are appropriate for our orchestra. So we have a program committee and a conductor who work together to decide which pieces are appropriate, that maybe we haven't played in a while or possibly ever, things we think the audience would like, things that members have suggested or that members want to play. Right. So there's a lot that goes into deciding the program. Right.
Like perhaps a concerto form, you might have a soloist playing with the orchestra as a whole. In a symphony, everybody's playing, and depending on your team, it depends on the players. And I just wondered, you mentioned being open to people. Sometimes it's not that you're recruiting, but in order to handle certain material, you need certain parts.
Right.
So how does that work out? If somebody wants to get involved and they want to get in there and get more experience, they have to fit in a larger picture too.
Right.
Right?
So we're always open to people contacting the conductor, which is Scott Charette, is our orchestra conductor, if they think they're interested in possibly playing. We're always looking for string players, because orchestras need lots of string players: violins, violas, cellos, basses. So we're always looking for that. Some of the other instruments, we may or may not have seats available for people at any given time, but it's also the best idea is to contact Scott Charette, the conductor, and let him know you're interested. He can let you know if there's availability, or possibly keep your name on a list. If there becomes a seat available, then he knows who to contact. So we don't have particular audition times. We just have people letting us know when they're interested.
Right. So I want to mention the website now. You can jot this down and you can follow up on everything Sandy is talking about. It's real simple, fortunately. Willimanticorchestra.org. How about that? Willimanticorchestra.org. Now, the ages can range from high school and above. But over the years, since you've been there almost from the earliest time, what's the age range that you see coming and going? maybe older folks, let's say older folks, but maybe they've been living here longer, they're more settled, they stay longer, so they're long-standing members. Younger people may be here for a while, then they may move on. So how does that work, and how does it affect your process of getting people?
Yeah, we when I first started, I was a college student. I started playing in the 80s, and I was at UConn, and I found out about the orchestra, and it was an additional opportunity to play besides the ensembles that were at UConn. But there were a lot of professors, frankly, because with UConn and Eastern both in the area, we have a lot of faculty members around, and they may not be music faculty members, but a lot of faculty members, it just seems often, have a love of the arts. They may play an instrument. It may be something they want to do on the side. When they retire, sometimes they have more time to practice, more time to play.
That's a good thing about this area. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So we have a lot of well-educated people around, and some of them know how to play instruments, and that really works well for us. But we also, now we always want young people coming in, of course.
Of course,
because,
everybody wants that.
we want to have a vibrant, age-differentiated group. And we have college students sometimes from Eastern or UConn or other schools. We have some high school students now, and it's always great to have high school students come in.
Yeah.
We do have some people that started in high school, I remember maybe 20 or so years ago, and they're still with us. So that's awesome. I mean, if someone stays in the area and they keep playing, that's really great. We also often will have maybe less experienced players, especially in the strings. They can sit and share a stand with an experienced player, so they can learn, almost get mentored a little bit while they're playing. So that works out really well to have a wide age range in the group.
Yeah, that apprentice aspect is how the music, that's to the roots of the original traditions, passing it on, before there were music schools.
Right.
But this is another whole level of that. And, the thing is, too, with technology now, we have a website, I mentioned that. They have many genres to pick from in terms of the themes, a symphony, a large-scale piece versus small. And I wondered, do you find more interest in certain areas over the years when you have more response than others? Folks always say, well, do the popular things everybody knows because it's familiar, and they always like to hear the familiar. But people that are more deeply diving would like to be surprised. You're smiling, right? How does that work out?
It's interesting. I've been in the orchestra. I will correct something you said at the beginning. You said the orchestra is about 40 years old. I've been in it about 40 years, but it's older than that. So
okay.
It's older than me.
I stand corrected.
So we can talk about the beginning of the orchestra. It's a very interesting history of the orchestra. But I do remember, it kind of depends to some extent who's running the show, basically, who maybe the officers of the orchestra are, who's on the program committee, who the conductor is, what kind of music they like to play. I remember a time period when we were very much focused on classical, and by classical I mean that certain time period, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, and there were people that's all they wanted. They said, we're only doing Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn, and we did that for a number of years because that was what people wanted to do then. That's not what we're doing now. In fact, we have been doing, our current conductor and committee have been programming some more modern pieces.
Wonderful.
So it depends, I think. Most of the people in the orchestra right now, I think, are willing to try different things. We don't seem to have people that say, if it's not Mozart, I'm not playing it. We don't have that now. We have people interested in a lot of different things. And then the audience gets to hear. I don't know because I haven't asked the audience what they want, but they seem to enjoy it and they come back. So.
That's right. They have for many, many years. So the performance we're talking about for December 15th is at the E.O. Smith High School. And the orchestra's had different homes over the years where they rehearse, where they perform. I guess the high school's where you rehearse a lot of the times now.
Yes.
But you also have done work at Eastern.
Yes.
So maybe talk about your different homes and how they're different and what they're nice.
Yeah. So there's some history of the orchestra that was written by, not me, by one of our members previously, Dave Yutzi.
Yes.
And it talks about, there were actually two Willimantic orchestras. And the first one started around 1921, where somebody started up a group. They were playing, they had an orchestra, and the person who was running it was founded by Marie Blanchette, who was a Willimantic resident. She retired from the orchestra. She decided not to do it anymore, and she got Victor Norman to take over. And he was at the time this was around the early 40s, I guess. He was also conducting a group in the New London area that I think at the time was called the New London Civic Orchestra or something like that. So he was conducting both of these orchestras in Eastern Connecticut. And they went for a while separately, and at some point they combined under him and became the Eastern Connecticut Symphony Orchestra, which is still there in New London. So,
wow, what a history.
Yeah, and so in the 50s, I think they say around 1952 or 54. And if you look at the Eastern Connecticut Symphony Orchestra's website, they also cite this same history. It started around in the early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So then there was nothing in Willimantic for a while. And then around 1977, one of the music professors at Eastern, Desmond Ward Fiandella, was a music professor, started a chamber group. They called it the Eastern Chamber Group, Eastern Connecticut Chamber or something. And so they started that group, and it was faculty. It was music faculty, other faculty, community members, students from Eastern started this group, and they got it going again. And then it was called something else for a while, but in 1980 they had what they called a premiere concert where they called it the Willimantic Community Orchestra. So as of 1980, we had an orchestra again, and then it went through the 80s. In 1987, the orchestra was incorporated, and at that point the name changed to just Willimantic Orchestra. That was the name we were incorporated under. And so since then, we've had, I got to list all these different conductors. We've had several different conductors. We were, for a long time, for about 25 years, David Vaughn was our conductor.
Yes, indeed, I've had it on, yes.
But way back in the early 80s, now some people would know the name Bruce Bellingham. He was one of the conductors, right?
He was wonderful. He was very community involved. He did a great show up at the Yukon radio station, WHUS, for many years. He did a show up there, and he would preview the upcoming concerts at the school.
Yeah.
He was a great radio guy, too, and a good
and
conductor.
we have the auditorium in the town hall is named after him.
That's right. Thumbs up to Bruce.
He was a Victorian association and musician, and he was one of my professors at UConn, one of my music professors. So he was one of the conductors. There were others that they would kind of trade off in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had some different people. We had David Vaughn for a very long time, and then Scott Charette came in 2017, and he's been our conductor since then.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk briefly, while we have a few minutes, about finances now. How do you folks float the boat? Because every arts organization has a very different story about where their support comes from and how their overhead is managed. They all have a different struggle. So I guess looking back a few years, how did you manage COVID in some way? What did you do? And then, I know, right away the head rolls. I know, a 360. Mm-hmm. But now that we're out of it now, people are bouncing back. But how about the finances, and how can people help raise funds?
Yeah, so members do pay a membership fee. It's a very small fee. Mm-hmm. I think it's $25, and I think it's been the same thing for the 40 years I've been in.
Okay,
so
sure.
We don't want anyone to not be able to play because they can't afford the fee, but that pays for a little bit of some things we need to pay for. We also we used to sell ads in our programs.
Many groups do that.
Yeah,
right.
and so we
Sure.
would get a lot of the local businesses would support us by buying an ad in the program, and we would make much of our money that way. And then during COVID, we didn't play for a few years, and we
Everybody
didn't
shut
have
down.
programs, and so we didn't raise money, but we used the money to pay the conductor basically and to rent music or any other expenses we might have. We don't pay the performers. In fact, we pay a membership fee to play.
Right.
Some orchestras have to pay their performers, but we don't do that because we're a community group, not a professional orchestra. So we never really got back to selling the ads, and we found that our members are very, very generous. And when they pay their dues, many people pay more or a lot more than their dues. They just donate. So so a lot of our members, I think, really support the orchestra and just donate. So if anybody wanted to support the group, they certainly could get in touch with somebody from our website, probably the conductor, and just say, I'd love to donate money, and we'd say, thanks.
No, I think you'll never say no. We're too busy to take that phone call.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's fortunate because some groups are really 2024. They don't have a base where that is available, and they're trying to find other ways. And then groups that are small and marginal are competing for the same dollars in the same communities. And it gets to be kind of Darwinian sometimes.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Well, and I also have to say that for many years, our home was at Eastern Connecticut State University because it was started by Eastern faculty, and we were in the old Schaefer Hall where we would rehearse and perform in Schaefer Hall. And then a few years back, they converted that into a dorm, and that space became not available to us anymore. And there's a beautiful new building on Eastern's campus, the Fine Arts Instructional Center. And we are able to do some concerts there, but we have not been able to practice there. So we thank Eastern for the many, many years of them supporting us and giving us practice space and concert space. And now we thank the E.O. Smith High School has stepped up when we lost our space at Eastern. They stepped up and offered us rehearsal space. And sometimes we perform there, as we are for this concert. We will actually be performing in the auditorium at E.O. Smith High School. We also try to get out into the Willimantic community and let people know we're there. So we've had rehearsals at different places, not because we didn't have a place to practice, but because we wanted to make ourselves a little more visible. So
Absolutely.
We practiced at the hospital one time. There was a room there they were able to let us use. We've practiced at the middle school. We've also practiced at the Mansfield Middle School. So we have a lot of support from different organizations in Willimantic and Mansfield, mostly in the community.
And we're talking about an orchestra-sized space. We're not talking about a room for a quartet. So you have to deal with a lot of space issues too.
Right.
But it's great for people to see because the Fine Arts Center is just an amazing acoustic space up there.
It is.
Schaefer was the bulwark for decades, and they hung on for the long time as a real arts hub in so many ways. And the investment in that new arts center, every program there is just blown up, including music, of course, But it's a great home. So let's wrap up. Before we close, I want to mention, in case you've joined us, we're talking with Sandy Rosado, who wears many hats in our community, but she's here today as a member of the Willimantic Orchestra. They have an event on December 15th. Could you run down one more time the plans for the day, in case somebody missed it earlier? And then we'll mention the website one more time.
Yes, our concert will include Mozart arias sung by Caroline O'Dwyer, who's our featured artist. We'll have Sibelius Symphony No. 2, Amy Beach Ball Mask, and Leroy Anderson's Sleigh Ride for a little Christmas cheer.
Okay.
And it's at 3 p.m. at the E.O. Smith High School
3
on
p.m.
December 15th. And it is a free, we have donations are suggested, and that is another way that we raise some funds, is that people can make donations, but we will never turn anyone away if they can't pay anything. We want you to come in and hear the music anyway.
Well, thank you, Sandy, for the good work you're doing all year to keep the music alive in all of its different forms. I wish you a great turnout again on December 15th. To find out more about the orchestra, including this event, it's willimanticorchestra.org. So I wish you a good turnout, and we'll have you back maybe towards winter and spring to follow up on what's happening for February and March, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good to have you. All right, we'll take a short break and come right back. Don't go away. All righty, we're back live on the Homefront. John Murphy here with you. If you'd like to get involved, by the way, I want to give an email. If you'd like to be a guest in the studio to share your story about the good work you're doing, the doors are always open to you. John@humanartsmedia.com is all you have to do. We'll be happy to arrange that. If you go to the YouTube channel WILI Radio, some of our programs have their own playlists. You can have all their different shows in an archive as well. So I'm very happy to spend the last part of the show today talking about one of my favorite things is music, and a very amazing musical archive project that I've talked about many times in the last several years. It's about the music of Owsley Stanley, one of the great audio engineers. And when he left us, he left behind about a 1,300 recording archive of concerts that he recorded in his own very unique way. He had a unique way to place the microphone. So rather than think about stereo, he thought more like a photograph from left to right across the field. So when you listen to his music, it's like you're right in the front seat in the center. It's a different kind of sound. And these recordings involve so many musicians, and we'll talk about later. Right now we have a phone call coming in with Pete. He is one of the founders of the foundation. This is their newest release. They have 10 other ones. This one is called John Hammond, Blues at the Boarding House from San Francisco, 1973. We're going to hear a short track to give you a little taste. We played some last week. This is another one. It's a John Lee Hooker tune, Groundhog Blues. This is John Hammond 50 years ago.
Just a low down dog, a dirty groundhog, some rooting round my back door. Oh, just a low down dog, a dirty groundhog, and rooting round my back door. If I catch them moving around here, with his hang bound waiting every morning for I leave home. Yes, his hang bound waiting morning before I leave. I leave home in the morning, child, and he's hanging around all day long. I'll get me some toad frog heads, cook it all together, I'll brew it up good, fix it up right, kill that old dirty ground. Oh, I bet you my bottom dollar than He-Man. Won't be around my back door. I said goodbye, baby, but I'm leaving you now. Goodbye, baby, oh Lord, I'm leaving you now. I did what I wanna. Yes, I killed that dirty groundhog. Man, he's through. Man, Stanley Hooker. Stanley Hooker is my man.
Okay, some really wonderful audio featuring John Hammond, one of the folks that brought the blues, some of the deepest blues we have, to large audiences around the U.S. and the world. John Hammond. These recordings are from 1973 in San Francisco. It's the latest release from the Owsley Stanley Foundation. I've had, I think, 3 interviews before this one. They've had wonderful recordings, all based on Owsley Stanley's very unique recording method. The way he captured sound was more about you physically being there than hearing a traditional stereo recording you might be used to. It's a different experience. That's why they call these sonic journals. Right now on the phone, I believe from the Boston area, we have Pete Bell with us. He's one of the co-founders of the foundation several years ago. Pete, are you with us?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me tonight.
Hey, it's good to have anybody else, including you, from the foundation here. I've had Hawk a few times, and the work you do is really wonderful, and I'm glad to share it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So before we get into some history, let's talk about this new release and how you put this one together. I know you had a wonderful experience. John Hammond is 81 now, folks. I believe 81. And you had a chance to hang with him and listen to his own recordings. So talk about that and how you put this whole collection together.
You know, it's probably our greatest joy at the foundation. We have 80 different artists in the archive, and they're all about 50 years old, which means the artists are, many of them getting up there in years.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the greatest joys is when we get to go play the tapes for them live. So when we do a release, we only do it with the partnership of the artist, with the permission of the artist. But we also want to get their story. Part of Bear's mission in making a sonic journal was to capture what the room on that specific night sounded like. But now for us as the next generation, the foundation is Owsley's children, Bear's children, and myself and Hawk. We're the next generation. So to us to get that experience of a sonic journal for that night, it also means getting the story of that night, to put it in context. So we did the legwork. We went down to Jersey City, where John lives, and we spent a day playing the tapes for him. And, the music, it's like an audio time machine. The way Bear recorded was so vivid that it brings you back. So just to get to watch the reaction on his face, to hear himself 50 years younger, and he said, this is me as solo country blues. John was typically in a band. Record labels like to put him in a band, but he said, this Bear captured me doing what I love the best, solo country blues.
And he did so many styles on this gig, too. It was a fluid mix of these traditions over thousands of miles of history, too, between each style. But the soloing is what really stands out here. And I wondered also how he approached the fact that his dad, people know as the great John Hammond Jr., although they both have John Hammond. His dad was a legendary music producer, supporter of the arts. He signed Bob Dylan, and he was a piece of musical history. And in his youth, his dad thought maybe blues might not be the best path. I don't want to say he discouraged him, because I read his booklet. By the way, this collection comes with a very nicely written booklet that gives you context for everything. So John Hammond's old man wasn't really into the blues the way the son was. What did you learn about that, and how he handled that when he didn't have the support of the home base?
Yeah, it was a fraught relationship. His father, who had the exact same name, John Hammond, was, he was the king of Greenwich Village. And, John's coming up in Greenwich Village, and his dad is this legendary A&R guy and producer for Columbia Records, starting in the 1930s, where he discovered Billie Holiday and Count Basie, and it just kept going all the way through, Aretha and Dylan and
Springsteen.
Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
And arguably one of his best discoveries was Robert Johnson, the great Delta blues player, who he didn't personally produce, but he did popularize him. And so John's coming up in this tradition, but he kept saying, I didn't have the closest relationship with my dad. He said I respected him and loved him, but he lived with his mother. His parents were divorced, and he wanted to break through on his own. And how do you break through on your own when you have the same name as your dad? So I was, a little curious, and I opened up Dylan's biography. So John Hammond, the son, and Bob Dylan were very close. They came up at the same time. So I cracked into Dylan's autobiography, Chronicles, and sure enough, he talks about getting signed by John Hammond, the father. Yep. And he sets the scene. He said, I looked over on his desk, and there was my friend Jeep. And John the Hammond, the child, his nickname was Jeep. And he said, I had no idea, right there in his autobiography, he said, I had no idea it was the same Hammond. So he really did want to break through on his own.
And that was right in the height of the whole Greenwich Village folk revival scene, with so many artists, including Dylan and Joan Baez and many others, all exploding at the same time within a few years.
Yeah, back then, in that scene, blues was just one more kind of American vernacular idiom, like sea shanties and work songs. So this second generation of artists were digging. They were learning these songs from records. They were learning them from compilations. And, blues is now gets its own aisle in the record store, so to speak. But back then, he kind of had to find his audience, and so he was in the mix with this really fertile place that was Greenwich Village. He had Jimi Hendrix play in his band with him 2 times, because Jimi Hendrix was also coming up through there.
Right, so, imagine that.
It was really quite a place.
Yeah, it was a locomotive of its own. And here's another amazing story that Pete talks about in this collection. It involves Duane Allman, that they were at the same time in the same recording studio doing projects, and he ended up at Capricorn Records recording, and the band was looking for a blues player. And this young white dude comes in, and they didn't really know what to expect because the way he was playing, if you closed your eyes, you couldn't believe who was in front of you. Could you talk about that and how he had to really surprise people that his incredible soloing was really a voice that was missing, that was really a deep part of rock and roll that had been revealed?
Yeah, the labels didn't quite know what to do with John, so there wasn't a big market for pure blues, so they tended, rock and roll borrowed so heavily from the blues, and the British scene for sure took American blues music, especially Robert Johnson, and, Led Zeppelin and Eric Clapton.
John Mayall, those kind of guys,
Fleetwood Mac in its original incarnation, and certainly the Rolling Stones. So he had to compete with, this exciting version of it. And so the labels would put him in with, Duane Allman. His first electric band was the Band. John Hammond kind of, before Dylan, had Robbie Robertson with him and all the members of the band.
Rick Danko,
so they just didn't quite know how to market him because he wasn't rock and roll. He still was the blues. And so when he was left to his own devices, he wanted to be more like, frankly, like original Robert Johnson before he was Led Zeppelin. And that's what's really cool about Bear's recording is he got John the way John wanted to be.
Just want to mention, in case you joined us on the radio here, we're talking to Pete Bell, one of the co-founders of the Owsley Stanley Foundation. And if you want to follow up on our chat today and learn more about this incredible archive of music, just go to the website, owsleystanleyfoundation.org, because it's loaded with good stuff. And when you go there, you're going to see these names to show you this music that might be lost if they don't preserve it. We're talking about the Chieftains, Johnny Cash at the Carousel Ballroom, Tim Buckley. I talked to Hawk about that one when he was at the Carousel. Ali Akbar Khan, an incredible master musician. Commander Cody, New Writers, Jorma Kaukonen, Jack Cassidy, the Allman Brothers Band, Phil Maurice, and Merle and Doc Watson. This is real history from the 70s, 60s, over a couple of decades. And they have over 1,300 recordings. And I'm going to ask Pete about how they're keeping this effort alive and how you first joined together as a co-founder. What inspired you to finally take on this mammoth job to say, yeah, this is worth saving? And how have you had success getting the word out around the country so these fans will know that this is a mecca of a new kind?
Well, Bear died about a little more than 10 years ago.
Right.
And, he knew that it would be, the tapes needed to be preserved. The reel-to-reel analog tapes are a decaying medium.
Right.
But that it would be too expensive to do it with the technology at its time. So he kept them very well stored. They were kept with the Grateful Dead's vaults. And so we were fortunate in that they turned out to be mostly in great condition, but we needed to raise money to save them. So we started with some great seed money, both with the benefit from Hot Tuna, and the Grateful Dead have been incredibly supportive with their participation role in nonprofits over the years. And the Grateful Dead's wonderful mastering engineer, Jeffrey Norman, has been at it, digitizing these tapes using the Grammy Archive protocol for almost 10 years now. And we've already preserved about 1,200 reels. We have about 200 left. We originally had 1,300 reels, but we've gotten the word out through the albums, and so people have actually repatriated some reels that, some of Bear's friends said, I found some Miles Davis in the garage, or I found some Thelonious Monk in the garage. Yeah.
Wow.
And so now we're up to more like 1,400 reels. So we've been cranking away, and as we do it, if we find particularly great sounding reels, rare performances, and really notable artists, then we'll go to the artist and say, is this something we could release as an album so we could get the music back into the world? And, so fortunately, the sales of the albums have been enough to help support the digitization effort and now the production of these records. So it's now a self-sustaining effort.
That's such good news, because by making this a circuit that completes, you have the circle that Ken Kesey would say, when you can log in there, support the music, and you're keeping this so new generations will hear what you might think of as classical music 100 years from now. And the cost is high, and all the folks in the foundation are volunteers, people, so this is love through sound, and I want to commend you, Pete, and everybody for staying with this, because it's a mammoth task. Have you had good media coverage, or is it mainly through the fans? The whole Dead Network is an immense thing of its own, but I just wonder how you get the word out, and can you help with that? I mean, can people help you with that, because the archive is still growing as people find more stuff?
Yeah, I mean, word of mouth is the greatest. You know, we have artists like the Allman Brothers that help, sell a lot, and that helps support the archive.
Right.
Ones like the Johnny Cash release made it into the New Yorker magazine, so it did get great publicity. But the mission is to get all the music out there. So some like, Tim Buckley or even John Hammond are maybe slightly less well-known names, but to us they're just important to save them all. So a lot of it's through word of mouth, and our dream at the very beginning was that people would start to trust Bear's Sonic Journals as a series, and buy them even if they didn't know the artist as well. And that was sort of a pipe dream at the beginning, but it's turned out that way, where we have about 30,000 Facebook followers, and a lot of them will just buy the new releases, even if it's someone they don't know as well. They're sort of trusting the sound quality and the art.
Well, when I talked to Hawk before, something that he talked about that I want to share with you is the irony of distribution of audio. People are so trained for MP3s, they don't even hear the difference. But I wondered, since you're doing really unique audio, and I want you to take a second, if you would, to, without losing us in the engineering, what was special about his microphone technique, because somebody has to hear it. You can read about it. I can talk about it for 10 minutes with you. But if you put on this record on a decent stereo with decent reproduction, you can hear this guy has a different ear. Can you talk about that, and why these recordings are like classic movies that were shot a certain way by a certain director, and this collection is one of a kind?
Yeah, Bear, he... Not only did he make the recordings, but he made the Grateful Dead sound systems. They were starting in a time when...
Wall of sound.
People, ultimately it was the wall of sound, but he didn't know how to get there. Like, there wasn't really such thing as a great sound system at the time. So to let the Grateful Dead improvise in front of larger and larger audiences, he had to improvise as a sound man and come up with new and better ways. And these sonic journals were his journals. They were his working tool to see how his experiments were progressing. And what he wanted to record was the way a specific hall sounds on a specific night. And I think his most basic technique was to use better and better equipment, better mics, Macintosh amps. But his probably most original insight was that humans are exquisitely good at localizing a specific sound source. So if you are in a dark room with a concrete floor and you drop a glass, you immediately know where it fell. And in the same way that your eyes see in 3D, your ears have 3D sound.
Right.
And they can't be fooled. And if you go to a concert, even with high-quality equipment, if they're duplicating sounds, it's like going to the 3D movies without your glasses on. And Bear tried to get all sounds coming from single locations. The ultimate version is the wall of sound, where each of Phil's bass strings had its own stack of speakers. But even early on, he was working towards that principle. And so he would mic the artist in a way that really just made it sound like you're there in the room with them. And maybe the most famous example until now was Old and in the Way, which was the greatest selling bluegrass album of all time until pretty recently. It really is something to hear.
It is something to hear, and you have to be there. I remember hearing Phil, this would be in Syracuse, New York, in the early 70s. The very first time I heard him tune up, and the bass guitar flew from left to right, up and down, in a vertical, horizontal way. I never heard bass frequencies move that way, so I could hear it and see it just the way you described. It was a unique space. And that's why people have to hear these records. If you have decent stereo speakers, my friend Calvin said, I felt like I was in front row center, and it was like, if somebody mixes it for stereo, sometimes you lose that physical space of the room because they play with the mics, right? That's what you're trying to describe. You capture the sound, but you leave it alone.
Yeah, Bear believed that the artists should be the ones determining what their sound is, and the sound man's job is almost like a supporting musician in a band. They're there to help the artist sound better, not to color their sound and not to add their own opinion. So he wouldn't use any equalization. If he felt like it didn't sound quite right, he would move the mics around. He would never equalize anything. So his job was to get out of the way and try and capture what they wanted to sound like themselves.
Right. Keep everything, they call that flat. Keep it flat.
Yeah.
Right. Well, this has been great, Pete. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk about this. I don't want to lose people in audio geek conversations here, but like you said, hearing is believing, put it that way. And if you hear these records, you're going to hear the man behind the controls, let me tell you. A different kind of space travel.
Right. The idea was that the technology is there to advance the art in the same way that Leo Fender or Les Paul realized their job was to let the artists get through. So it is great sound, but it's to make the artists get across what they wanted us to know. That's
right. Real communication. That's right. Well, I wish you a great success with this release that just came out again. It's from Bear Sonic Journals, Volume 11, the 11th chapter. John Hammond, You're Doing Fine, from 1973. I wish you a great success, and we'll try to get you guys back after the first of the year. You have some more stuff you said you're working on. I always ask Hawk to say, well, give me some teasers, man. What are you sitting on? And he just doesn't usually like to do that.
Well, I can't say, right, we don't say artists or titles, but I will say there were two projects that we were working on with Phil Lesh to varying degrees, and of course, tragically and sadly, he died before we finished either of them. So now we're extra motivated to finish those off, really as a tribute to all of our love for Phil. So hopefully, one of those will be up next in the queue.
All right. So we'll try to get you guys back late winter, early spring. We'll see about the right timing. In the meantime, folks, check this work out. Find out for yourself what they're trying to do to save this beautiful art. Just go to OwsleyStanleyFoundation.org. So thanks again, Pete. I wish you the very best.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
All righty. Keep the faith, folks. Keep the faith. We got a few minutes to go before they're going to blow me out of here. We got a game coming up. You cannot get in the way of a game because it's thermonuclear. Couple of things, speaking of thermonuclear, I want to tell you somebody in our town that has thermonuclear love, and that's Joe Malinowski. He was announced last week as one of the many arts heroes across Connecticut for 2024. The Connecticut Office of the Arts has an annual survey. People do their voting. They put it all together. Different towns all across the state make their arts heroes. And Joe Malinowski from Willimantic Records is covering the Wyndham area here in the Quiet Corner. So thumbs up, Joe. I did this last week. We love you for this great work you do. Joe provides a place to keep old music in circulation, and he allows live music to stay alive. He provides concerts throughout the year, and I think so many people appreciated that those votes got him over the top. So thanks again, Joe. We'll try to get him back to embarrass him properly next month. We'll see about that. But I had to let you know, if you didn't know, you need to know, Joe is the man. Next week, we're going to talk about the Willimantic Public Library. We're going to continue our conversation about healthcare, which is being restructured all over the state. They're changing the corporate models. They're changing the delivery models. And we've had the Wyndham United to Save Our Healthcare Coalition on many times over the last few years. They're going to give us an update next week. And also we're going to hear from a very great organization in New London at Fiddleheads. It's a food co-op that's very similar to what we have here at our Willimantic Food Co-op. It's an example of economics that's really community-based. We're going to have Brad Sheridan here next week talking about that for our listeners in New London. We're trying to get more and more of our shows to integrate artists and groups from that part of the state as well to cover the whole eastern region in a better way. We're also going to get hygienic arts here in the near future as well. So I think we're just about ready to roll out for today. I want to thank you again. If you want to get involved here, don't be shy. It's John@humanartsmedia.com. We'll see you next week for another edition. Take care of yourselves.